Hello, my name is Sarah Glatt, and today I'll be presenting psychopaths and the prefrontal cortex for EDP 310. Starting off, I'm interested in this topic because I wanted to understand what makes a psychopath's brain differ from a non psychopath's brain. I also wanted to get a clear understanding of what a psychopath is and the characteristics that go along with this clinical disorder. To start off, I wanted to talk about what a psychopath is. Psychopathy is a personality disorder characterized by a lack of emotional depth, cold treatment of others, and impulsive antisocial behavior. Other psychopathic personality traits include reduced sensitivity to punishment, lack of empathy for those affected by their behavior, difficulty regulating emotions, shallow and superficial behavior, and impaired emotional perception and recognition. Psychopathy is prevalent in 1% of the general population in the United States, but prevalent in 15 to 25% of the prison population. Unfortunately, there are no current effective treatment strategies for psychopathy, and this is partly because the psychobiological mechanisms of this disorder are poorly understood. Next, we will discuss the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is in the front part of the brain's frontal lobe. It can be divided into two large regions, the lateral prefrontal cortex, which includes the dorsolateral and ventrolateral cortex, and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which includes the orbital frontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex helps manage thinking, emotions, and behavior, but more specifically is involved in planning, making decisions, staying focused, adjusting to new settings, and goal setting. In my research, I found psychopaths have reduced connectivity in their prefrontal cortex, specifically in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex and the orbital frontal cortex. These areas are critical for monitoring ongoing behavior, estimating consequences, and incorporating learning into decision making. They also play an important role in facial emotional recognition. Neurologists have noted for decades that personality changes due to ventral medial prefrontal cortex damage have striking resemblance to psychopathic traits. The earliest example of this was in 1868 when Phineas Gage, a 19th century railroad construction foreman, was struck in the front of his head with an iron rod in an accident. Before the accident, he was dependable and trustworthy, but after, he was now disrespectful, profane, impulsive, and unreliable. The term pseudo-psychopathy describes this personality change observed in patients with brain damage involving the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. The changes include diminished guilt, shame, and empathy, increased irritability, poor planning and responsibility, failure to learn from punishment, and reduced automatic arousal to emotionally charged stimuli. More recently, moral judgment and emotional decision making were added to the list of changes. In an article by the Journal of Neuroscience titled Reduced Prefrontal Connectivity in Psychopathy, researchers did an experiment involving functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, to test their hypothesis that psychopathy is associated with lower levels of correlated activity between the ventral medial prefrontal cortex and other brain structures in a resting state. This fMRI data reveals that psychopaths are associated with reduced resting functional connectivity in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which confirms the researchers' hypothesis. The last row shows the difference between activity between non-psychopaths and psychopaths. In my research, something that stuck out to me was the emphasis on the significant negative consequences of this disorder. The Journal of Neuroscience describes psychopathy as neuropsychiatric disorder that imposes a substantial burden on society. Essie Bitting, in her book titled Psychopathy, A Very Short Introduction, she says, psychopaths generate substantial societal costs in relation to their incarceration and failure to consistently contribute to the workforce. And finally, the National Library of Medicine says, given the significant societal cost of the criminal activity associated with the disorder, there is a pressing need for more effective treatment strategies. I believe it's incredibly important to understand what psychopathy is and how it affects the brain. It's important to understand what this disorder looks like and the characteristics that accompany it. The research on psychopathy is limited due to this disorder's complex nature, but I'm excited for this topic to be further researched, and hopefully an effective treatment plan can be created for people who suffer from psychopathy. Thank you.